Welcome to TAP. I am Mannah and I am so honored to be joined by spiritual guide and author to The Others Within Us, and another title, Explorer of the Far Reaches of Internally Family Systems. Welcome, Robert Falconer.
Thank you.
And sometimes you say you want to be called Bob.
Yeah, Bob is fine, please.
Okay. It seems like such an ordinary name for an extraordinary person, Bob, but I'll try. I want to begin by saying how much I really love your book because it is so research-based. There's so much evidence to your arguments. And for someone like me who's very curious, it's just a joy to read that kind of book where there's so many references, so many quotes. It's like I can't get through a page without different quotes to authors and cultures and different views. I think you said somewhere that all of this research has exploded your worldview or something like that.
Well, it was really that first case that I mentioned, the case that changed my life. That got me going, and I couldn't ignore that evidence as much as I wanted to. And then I did all the research because I'm a very sort of thorough, scholarly, research-oriented guy. And this is such a sort of weird topic that I felt it needed that kind of very thorough research. It's definitely outside of the normal Western paradigm.
Yeah.
Way outside. That's that further reaches of IFS part. I mean, even people in the IFS world didn't like me talking about this publicly.
Yeah. I was introduced to you on this podcast by someone explaining about IFS, and she mentioned this farther reaches and you and like the whole spiritual basis. So that's really cool. Yeah. So you say it's not normal, and that's why maybe there's more pressure to do all of the research. But then I also feel that a lot of what you're saying, I guess a lot of people have some kind of relationship to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the phenomena of experiencing external energies is very normal. But in our culture, especially in academia, it's also normal to deny it and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And the academics don't like their theories being poked at, and that there's fundamental evidence that there's huge blind spots in the Western approaches to. I don't even like calling it mental illness anymore. Let's just say psychological or spiritual distress.
Right. Okay, so let's go to my first question here, because I think that is very much about that. The porous mind model, because I think that's what you're talking about now, our mental health system is, you call it somewhere a
Colonial.
Yes, thank you. Colonialism of the mind, exactly.
Yeah.
So what is the porous model of mind versus what we're doing right now?
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
big one.
that's a huge question.
Yeah.
The colonialism of an interesting sort of perhaps coincidence, perhaps not, is modern psychotherapy arose at the same time imperialism and colonialism were taking over the planet. And I think modern understandings of the mind share a lot with the attitude that could be colonial and imperialistic. There's this sort of idea that our ego, this little part of us up here that's our normal consciousness, is running things, and it should take over everything we're not normally aware of and like put colonies there and dominate and rule what was called the unconscious. And I think that's really backwards and wrong. There are vast resources and ways to connect with things that are much wiser than us in those farther reaches of our mind. So that's sort of a brief comment about the colonial thing. And the porous mind is a little bit different. Dick in IFS, the the basic thing he introduced is this idea that our mind is multiple.
Yeah.
We're not one single individual, we're a team. And the evidence for that now is overwhelming and coming from all these different fields. And, like for example, in artificial intelligence, they know that you can't create an artificial intelligence with just one central processor. You have to have all these subroutines, or in people, sub-personalities. You have to create a team. So we're built like that too. And if you take that seriously, which Dick did, it revolutionizes everything about therapy. And he's followed out the implications of that. And he also has discovered what he calls self, which is, I would call, an access to spiritual depth. Okay, so those are two things that I think Dick has done and IFS does brilliantly, and it is just that much revolutionizes psychotherapy. I think there's another step. And this is the idea that not only is our mind multiple, but it's also porous. Now, if you start thinking about this, it's kind of obvious, but our whole culture is built on the idea that it's not. Tanya Luhrmann, the great anthropologist, calls the Western model of mind the citadel model of mind. She says that we consider who we are to be like this citadel, this fortress, and it's all contained in our bony little skulls. Everything in there is private. It's ours. It's our property. There's that colonialism stuff coming up again. And it also constitutes our identity. So if we hear a voice or have a vision, this citadel sort of looks strong, but it's not. It's actually really, really fragile. Because if we see a vision or hear a voice, we think our brain is broken and we shatter. Mm-hmm. This citadel model of mind is pretty much unique to the Western world. It started about 400 or 500 years ago. We can trace the history of it. And as we trace the history of it, we see a long-going epidemic of mental illness that gets worse and worse. And there's lots of other bad things. And there are a lot of philosophers who've talked about this too, that this is really a disastrous theory of mind. And if you think about it in terms of alienation, many philosophers say alienation was the huge problem underneath the whole 20th century. A citadel model of mind is an alienated model of mind. If you think and feel yourself as a citadel, you're going to feel alienated, disconnected, and the universe will seem meaningless or hostile. So that's the bad news. The good, or some of the bad news.
Yeah.
The good news is when you start thinking about it, it's sort of obvious. It's almost brain dead obvious. Every living system is surrounded by semi-permeable membranes. Every single one. A cell, a single cell, it has a membrane that lets some stuff in, lets other stuff out, and it's semi-permeable. It's porous. An ecosystem is like that. It lets stuff in, lets stuff out. Our bodies are like that. Our organs are like that. Every living system is like that. Why in the world would we start assuming our minds and our awareness and our consciousness is different? It's actually like, what? And then you start looking around the world, it's a very rare belief. Very, very rare. It helps us manipulate the external material world, but it also, I believe, destroys us psychologically and spiritually. So that was a windy answer.
Great. And I'm just going to ask until I completely get it. So what is a porous mind? What is that?
It's a mind that can receive things from outside and can also let stuff go. Now, in one of her more recent articles, Tanya Luhrmann said, she co-authored this article, porosity is the heart of religion. The idea that we can receive contact from spirit for good or for bad is the heart of religion all over the planet, everywhere. And, we try and deny that in the West. And I think it costs us a tremendous amount.
Right. And so, for example, if someone has a psychosis, then we're a little bit more careful about this person, But then you also say that these are the people who are also geniuses, who are really creative.
Yeah.
Does this
Yeah,
have to do with the porous model?
yeah, definitely. There are measures of porosity, except they're not called that. This guy in England, I think his name was Dr. Church, was studying psychosis. And he developed what he called the schizotype scale. And he just wanted to see if he could get a written thing that would, test whether or not people were liable to have a psychotic break. And he just started out thinking of it in terms of psychopathology. But then he realized that the people who were scoring high on his test were also vastly more creative. They had way more extrasensory perception experiences. They were way more spiritual. And he has come, I think he's fully turned from thinking of this as psychopathology, is just thinking this is a measure of a human characteristic that we all have. And I would say that's porosity. That's what he's talking about. And porosity has a lot of great things going for it. And if you're really porous, you're going to have a hard time staying in consensus reality. Now, I want to say there are many other measures of this. There's one I really like called transliminality scale.
Yeah, is transliminal, is that the word that you prefer using rather than subconscious?
Yeah, yeah. A limin is a threshold. So it just means across a limit. And I think this was just developed in Australia first, and there's tests for it. The more ability you have to go across this threshold, I would say the threshold is what I'm talking about is a porous membrane. This is measurable. And the more of that ability you have, that openness, the more liable you are to have psychotic experiences. But also, once again, the more creative, the more extrasensory experiences, the more sense of meaning you have, which is really crucial and exciting. Now, you mentioned, I don't like the words unconscious or subconscious. They've sort of got that colonializing attitude right in them, don't they? I mean, there's something you want to get control of, or
Yeah.
they're less than you, or all that kind of nasty attitude. No, there's stuff across that threshold that is wiser than you are, that can connect you to the ancestors, that can connect you to spirit, or in Christian terms, the Holy Ghost, or all these ways you can conceive of the wonderful things that are across that threshold. And so transliminal doesn't have these negative judgments built into it, whereas unconscious and subconscious sort of do. And I think they're so bad that it makes it very hard for us to think in a good way about this whole subject. We're starting off carrying a big burden we don't need to carry. So if you just think of all those experiences as transliminal, you don't have to sort them out as to good or bad or anything right off.
Right.
One more thing I want to say about this is my undergraduate degree and a little bit of graduate work was in anthropology. And one of the great anthropologists I had the pleasure to study with personally is Victor Turner, or was, he's deceased. He talked about liminality. He didn't say transliminality, and he analyzed the structures of rituals, especially initiation rituals. Most of his work was done in Africa. And he said, they're all three-phase. They're characterized, there's a basic structure in every ritual, which is a pretty big claim. You start with the person enmeshed and in the culture they're in. You go through a certain phase which takes them across the limen, across the threshold into another psychic realm, the liminal realm, he called it, not transliminal. There, you can help people make changes in who they are that are lasting and profound, that you can't do in sort of normal consciousness. And then at the end of the ritual or the initiation or whatever it is, there's another series of processes that bring the person back down out of that liminal realm and reunite them with their culture. So again, it's very much this idea of a threshold or a membrane and porosity. And we can actually, there are things we can do that regulate porosity. A lot of people think psychedelics work because they make our minds temporarily more porous.
Right. This is so good. So when you said this, just this last thing, I just want to say, please keep going, because that's why I'm here, and I really look forward to hearing you speak. And even though I want to say, of course, to the listeners that everything is in the book, but it's nice to have these things repeated, especially when we are talking about actually replacing some of our words, right? Like replacing subconscious or unconscious with transliminal and trying that out. Also, I can't help to think about the archetype of Pisces, which is the porous archetype, which is the spiritual archetype. It's also the alcoholic. It has those.
Yeah.
It's the boundaries. Yeah. So in that sense, if I'm thinking about the archetype, it's definitely not all great. It's, as you said, it's really hard. I don't know if you said exactly this, but that's what I thought, that it's hard to live here on the planet. I think you said it's hard to live consensus, right?
In consensus
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful woman in England, Isabel Clarke, ISA, not Elizabeth, with an E on the end of Clarke, if any of your listeners want to get some of her books. She works a lot with inpatient psychotics, and she helps that a way she works with them is to help them sort out what's consensus reality and what's your own private reality. And that's such a respectful thing, because you honor the subjective reality of these experiences, and that they very often are the most meaningful experiences of a person's life. I want to tell a little story about porosity. It comes from Tanya Luhrmann, and I don't think this is in the book. You know, even though that's a very large book, I mean, 450 pages, a 30 plus page bibliography, a lot didn't make it. A lot. Most of my
Sure.
research did not make it into that book.
Wow.
Anyway, Dr. Luhrmann studies psychosis and spirituality worldwide and the culture impact on it. She studied psychosis, acute psychotic episodes in San Mateo, California, a few miles from where I live, Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India. Now, here in California, we spend something on the order of 1,000 times as much money on each acute psychotic episode. Guess who gets the worst results? We do.
Yeah.
Now, if humans were actually rational animals, which I am really doubting, we would be over at the feet of those people in those other countries studying what they do. That is not what's happening. We are exporting our ideas and our methods and eradicating the native ways of dealing with psychosis. Anyway, Dr. Luhrmann's theory about why these results are so big is, she said, well, in the West, we have this citadel model of mind, and somebody hears a voice and they shatter. They just shatter. In Accra, Ghana, they have what she called a cosmocentric way of considering the self. And they expect to hear voices. They expect to have a personal relationship with nature when they go out in the forest. So it's not a shattering experience to have these private reality experiences. Chennai, India, she says there they seem to have a sociocentric model of self. Self is always considered to be in relationship to other people. So they hear a voice and it's, oh, that's like my aunt. She always nagged me. It doesn't shatter them. So I think that's a very good example of why a more porous model of mind is really important.
Yeah, because that is the basis of how we diagnose, and even when we are therapists, we don't. Then still, we have our preconceived ideas about this.
One thing I get quite a bit because I have this reputation for being the weirdo. It used to annoy me, but now I just enjoy it. Why not? My research I think is very solid, and if people want to call me names, that's fine. If they want to discuss the research, that's fine. But I get a lot of young people, mostly women, who are having very powerful psychic experiences. And they come to me and they say something like, I can't tell my therapist that when I walk down the street, I hear dead people talking to me. They'll lock me up. They'll lock me up. I can't even tell my therapist. You know, and I just say to them, you've been given a very dangerous gift. It's very precious. I am so sorry that our culture does not provide a good container for this for you. And even in this culture where it's so difficult, it is still a gift. You actually have a treasure, and it's a very difficult one to handle.
And why is it dangerous?
Look, well, they get locked up, or in ages past, they got burned as witches.
Oh, like that. Okay, because of the society, because of culture, not because of the gift itself.
Well, it also drives some people nuts.
Okay.
It takes people to their edge and beyond.
Right.
If you think about this idea that the culture provides a container for these super intense experiences that people have, it makes sense that if the culture's container is bad or negative, it will make people view a greater percentage of those experiences as bad and negative. Because there's no way to hold it. It's something they have to shut the door on and try and keep that locked in the basement. And you know how well that works psychologically.
Sure. Yeah.
This is not a great. Yeah, and just giving people the recognition that, yeah, this is a good thing, and you can experience this. Most cultures all over the planet have had experiences like this throughout history. Your brain is not broken. And also, one of the things I think is really poisonous about many Western psychiatrists, they tell people who've had these incredibly powerful, quote, psychotic experiences, that was completely meaningless. That was just a product of your broken brain. It means nothing. This is often the most powerful emotional experience the person ever had. So powerful, it's overwhelming. And to be told that's just a broken brain, it robs the person of the ability to ever make meaning from that. And I think this meaning making and integration is key to some kind of psychological, spiritual health.
Absolutely. And I think that isn't that something that we know? Sometimes I'm not sure which part of it's outside the norm or not, but I think that's pretty accepted, right? That we need to make meaning as healthy individuals. We need to
Maybe
make.
there's lip service paid to it, but we're still telling people
Yeah.
their intense, quote, psychotic, end
Yeah.
quote, experiences are just, you got a broken brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you make meaning out of, okay, I have this disease, I'm diagnosed with this, and that's how I function. I also
Yeah,
want
and
to.
I'm a broken person, and the best life I can ever expect is to have a miserable little life and be dependent on meds, which will eat up my brain in 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And the great Western authority, the doctor in his white coat, is telling people that. You couldn't give them a more poisonous message. I want another example, cross-cultural example about florid psychotic episodes. A young man in California has a florid psychotic episode. He's locked up, which is appropriate to keep him safe, and he's given meds to, calm him down and get him through it. A young woman in Thailand has the same experience, florid psychosis, locked hospital, meds to get her down. He's told by the authority, the Western shaman in his white coat, you have a broken brain that was totally meaningless and, expect a miserable little life. She is told when she goes back to the village, oh, you've been chosen for a very difficult life. You are on the front lines of the cosmic battle between good and evil. If you fight well, you can help others who are also on the front lines. It's a very difficult life. Now, they both went on to have more florid psychotic episodes that required institutionalization. But which one had the more meaningful and beautiful life? Which one helped and contributed more to their culture? I mean, it's like, I can get irate, start jumping up and down, screaming here any minute.
Right. Oh, yeah, I see. So it's both the meaningful part, meaning-making part, and then it's also the meeting people respectfully, like you mentioned before.
Yeah.
And then I also heard the piece about you often have to take this role of being the weird one, going that step further, because as you say in the book, it wasn't your intention. It's just this has opened for you, and I think that I just want to say that it's so important daring to be the weird one because you're walking the talk here, right? And how else are we gonna see this if no one is doing what you're doing? And yeah, IFS is in a way such a new model, at least therapeutically, maybe not in its roots, but therapeutically. And then to take it that step further, I can see how that can seem, we don't want to lose the credit we have. But it is so interesting because all of the sudden with your book, it really is rhyming, matching with so many other cultures. And like you mentioned in the book, religions and all sorts of spiritual understandings.
Mm-hmm. I get a lot of disbelief and stuff. So one of the ways I like to phrase this is there is a basic biopsychological dynamic that happens in almost every culture we've ever studied. It's one of the most widely spread cultural traits. It also happens in every era of history we have records of. This biopsychological dynamic can have huge effects, negatively or positively. It's usually been referred to as spirit possession. That's the metaphor used to describe it. Whatever we call it, it's worthy of study. That just seems brain dead to me. Come on, gang.
For sure.
So spirit possession doesn't fit your ideology. Fine. But this is worthy of study. It's really important.
Mm.
I want to say one other thing.
Yeah.
The vast majority of spirit possession experience is positive. Now, it depends on which anthropologist and which culture and all that kind of stuff. There are all these cultures that devote tremendous amounts of energy and skill and ritual to inducing possession-like experiences. In evangelical Protestantism, it's the visit of the Holy Spirit. Now, they hate having this put in the same language as spirit possession, but it's the same kind of phenomena. Something comes from across that threshold or from outside our porous mind, enters us and transforms us, has a huge impact. Shamanic initiations are like this. Pretty much every culture has this. And we tend to think of exorcisms and deliverance and negative stuff and Hollywood images of demons, but the vast majority has been very positive. And it's hard, it's really hard to quantify that, but I think that's a fair statement.
Right, so it's more positive than negative, but even when you talk about the negative, the unattached burdens, then it's less dramatic than what you would understand by an exorcism.
Yeah. There's no reason to make it dramatic like that. It doesn't have to be a fight, usually. Usually these things are lost, they're suffering, they're starving, and they hook onto a person in their desperation and lostness.
Mm.
You know, the spiritists in Brazil who understand a great deal about this, um, they say they're all like that. They're all lost. They're just lost souls. And when we find one in a person, it becomes our responsibility to help that spirit.
That's maybe where it gets complicated, because if someone else sees or judges that you have a spirit possession, then this can become a really slippery slope, right? I mean, I grew up in a religion, and when I was as a young person, I joined these kind of Pentecostal churches. I think you actually mentioned them as well. And they, when I started to go into yoga, they would stand around me in a circle and pray for the spirit to leave me that got me into yoga, because that's their interpretation of it. So this is getting like, this is a real gray area depending on your belief.
Okay. There's one thing that's really this mirrors something in the internal world that's super important. The one thing you never want to do in working with something like this is treat a part of the person as though it were an external energy.
Yeah.
That is poison and causes all sorts of trouble. So the first thing you do is you check for the intention of that part or being or whatever it is, because you don't know what it is yet. Parts always ultimately have a good intention. So even suicidal parts or drinking parts, what's good about getting them drunk? Well, then they won't feel, then, eventually if you drill down enough layers, there'll be a positive. Why do you criticize her? I want to make her feel small. Well, what's good about making her feel small? Well, then she won't be so annoying. Well, why, what's, and you keep going and it says, well, I don't want her going out in the world and getting hurt.
Yeah.
There's the positive energy. If you just keep going with the critic layer after layer and it just says, I want to destroy her, so that's the first thing you do. You check for the intention of this thing. And the next thing is you ask it directly, are you a part? So what those people did when they were around you trying to get the spirit of yoga out of you, was violating both of those things.
So when you say that it's someone's responsibility as they find a spirit there, then you also say in that same sentence that they need to be educated about what that looks like.
Well, I wouldn't try and educate them. I'd try and get them to educate me. What is that thing in you? Oh, let's get curious about it. What's your intention? Why are you here? What do you need?
Yeah. So but the person who's trying to take something free another person needs to be educated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then you are saying what actually educates is the person who is possessed, potentially possessed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're the ones who know.
And so, how tired are you of speaking about this?
Oh, I still find it fascinating. I mean, it's most of my work because most therapists don't want to have anything to do with this. I get a lot of referrals.
That's funny, actually.
Yeah, it is. It was really good early on when I started doing the research.
Yeah.
Because there was this stream. And my favorite way of working with them is have the therapist and the client come together. And I'll do a session with the client while the therapist watches. And, because that way the therapist is learning all the stuff I know, and, the client gets some relief and healing.
That's pretty good. When I ask about if you're tired, there's also some kind of struggle here, right? There's a fight against the system or not?
That's just my life. I've been in the counterculture since the 1960s, and I never got out.
I know the feeling, and you are an Aries, and so there is a certain fight, and there is that need. I don't want to say a need for a mission. I guess it's more on a soul level that there is a mission. If there was nothing to fight for as a Aries, then could be very depressed, could get into fights, suppress yourself, and then all of a sudden become very angry. That would be the dark side of it. But when you have a mission, then all of that powerful energy goes into that. It's like a mission of standing up for other people somehow, representing some people. Yeah.
What I think is true. Earlier on, I was sexually abused as a child, and I was one of the first men to talk about that publicly.
Yeah.
And this is forgotten or ignored or swept under the carpet, but the therapy establishment tried to pretend that didn't happen. There was actually a textbook in America in the late 1960s of psychiatry that said incest happens less than 1 in a million families.
Yeah.
And when it does happen, it's often good for the child. That was the 1960s.
God.
That's not that long ago. And when the recognition came from the grassroots, and all the therapy schools fought it. And, that was a huge battle.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the diagnosis of PTSD. All these therapy schools, Harvard and all the rest, who are now claiming, we're the great trauma experts, they fought this diagnosis tooth and nail. It was only because this one psychiatrist, Robert Lifton, organized the Vietnam veterans. They had rap groups. They'd sit around and talk. They knew about PTSD. They had it, He organized that. They went to Washington. They put pressure on the government, which put pressure on the institutions. And finally, PTSD got in the DSM. It was only, I think, 1980, the early 80s. So these experiences of this battle around sexual abuse being recognized and PTSD being recognized have given me a very strong skepticism about the therapy world and the universities. And now they're all going, we're the great experts, we're the trauma experts. And I'm really glad they're doing that. But it would be kind of nice if they'd say, gee, we were so wrong.
Yeah.
Not so long ago, we were so wrong.
Absolutely. So your skepticism is, you mentioned that it's academia and universities, but I guess it's just a skepticism towards how people in group works. Right? It's groups of people who's doing this sort of thing where at first it's completely denied as a reality, and then all of a sudden it's just there. That's normal, of course.
Yeah. Schopenhauer put it brilliantly. He said, when any good, important new idea is introduced, first it's ridiculed and made fun of. Then it's argued against vehemently. Then it's accepted as self-evident.
Self-evident, yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying is if in the middle of that was just a little apology, that would be nice.
Yeah, that would be really nice, but if it won't happen, I should just let go of that.
Yeah.
That's just me.
Just take on the next fight then. And that's what you're doing. I mean, in the book, you're also mentioning this historic example of, I don't remember his name, but the one who came to think about washing his hands. That was
yeah. Semmelweis, Ignaz Semmelweis.
Yeah, so even hand washing was looked down upon, like ridiculed, and yeah.
Yeah, and he was thrown out of his job
crazy.
As a doctor and locked in a mental institution.
Yeah, because of that invention because of the idea of now we should wash our hands.
Seems to be.
Okay. Yeah.
The fight over. Well, see, the doctor is saying, "Are you blaming us for all this childbed fever?"
Yeah.
And he wasn't even going to talk about it. It was his students who talked about it because he knew it would be trouble.
Okay.
But then it started getting out. It got to be this huge fight, and they drummed him out of the medical world, and and he got locked up in a mental institution and died there.
And so this is so important to remember when we want to expand our worldview, right? And just like, can I see something more than I am now? Well,
yeah. I think that's another thing about locking up, quote, psychotics. There are cultures of visionaries. they're the ones who can see beyond where all of us can see. And a lot of what they see is useless or private reality or not helpful, but they're the ones who have enough flexibility and porosity of mind to receive the great new ideas. So as we lock them up and drug them into insensitivity, we're losing our visionaries. And boy, do we need some visionaries. I mean, you know,
Yeah, I guess you do know because people come to you, not just because you're a therapist, because you're that kind of therapist. And they share with you a lot of things that are in the hidden, right? It's,
yeah,
so
yeah,
we don't know about it.
I can't talk to this to anybody else. They'll lock me up.
Mm.
Yeah. And oh, another thing I want to say, I know I'm that ignorant. I'm as ignorant as those psychiatrists saying incest never happened. I'm sure someone's going to come along and explode everything I've put together, and there's something much bigger. You know, so I don't have any like final answers here. I think I'm just sort of cracking the next layer of the shell. Maybe, hopefully.
That is something I like about the book as well. That you you mentioned this a few times that you actually don't know, and that these are notes, or some of it is notes that we're still learning. And what you talk about is radical pragmatism. As I understand it, it means that it doesn't matter too much about the ontology and why it works, but just that it works.
Yeah, yeah. Well, or at least this is what's important to me.
Uh-huh.
People come to me because they're suffering, and I want to help relieve that suffering. Whatever works, helping relieve that suffering. If it doesn't damage them in some other way, like I wouldn't offer them heroin. But whatever genuinely relieves their suffering, I want to pursue. And I don't need to insist on my ideology or my worldview or the metaphors I use to describe this stuff. I'll adopt whatever the person brings. If I've worked with a fair number of Islamic people and they talk about jinn
Mm.
and quarin, and that's fine. No problem, you know. So I think it's super important. I want to tell one of my favorite stories because it's so basically respectful to learn your client's language and learn their worldview and not try and put your worldview on them. We don't have any final answers. We're still profoundly ignorant about almost everything. And we think we know stuff, but it's tiny, tiny, tiny.
Mm.
So anyway, there was this Dr. Milton Erickson was one of the greatest healers of the 20th century. He was a psychiatrist and hypnotherapist, and he worked a lot in locked mental wards. And in this one ward, he got on the ward, and there was a guy who they'd sort of, they'd fed him and they brought him out of his bed, and he would just stand in the hallway all day talking word salad, which is like, it sort of sounds like words, but it makes absolutely no sense.
Mm.
And he'd been doing that for years, and nobody could interact with him at all. So Dr. Erickson went up to the guy and copied down some of his word salad and sort of started studying like the grammar and how it was put together and stuff like that. And then when he thought he had it, he would go up to the guy, stand next to him, and just start talking word salad back to him. After only a few days, in the middle of the word salad, the guy turned to him and said, "Cut it out, Doc," and then snapped right back into his word salad.
So he was there. There was contact.
There was contact. All it took, this guy had been trapped totally alone in this world for years. All it took for that to start opening was Dr. Erickson to learn his language.
Yeah.
Trying to impose some other language on this man. All it took was that basic respect of learn the person's language. And we don't do that. As therapists, almost everybody trains us. We want to push our language onto them and our theory and, mush them into our theoretical framework. no, no, no.
That it is very powerful, because even just thinking about a therapy session that works out well, it's usually when we use the client's words for what's going on, when we mirror back rather than interpreting and putting on different words because we think they're better, maybe. But actually, what makes more sense is the exact words that they're saying.
Yeah, and get curious about what those words mean.
Yeah.
Curiosity, I think, is the panacea almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be truly curious, we have to set all our theories aside a little bit,
Yeah.
at least temporarily.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then you do get referrals to people who are dealing with. Are you not attracting people who need some kind of treatment for possession in particular?
Yeah, but it's all, I don't, almost never does it. Well, in my case, it never has to be this hostile kind of exorcism.
No, you do need
That's
to go
why
there.
there's this presence in me that wants me dead.
Yeah.
Or there's this presence, there's this voice in me that tells me I've got to rape that woman over there.
A really important point that you repeat in the book is, for this to work, for the healing to occur, is to not be afraid.
Yeah, that's the most important part about doing this work. In the therapist, and if you're a therapist and thinking about doing this work, I'd say the very first thing you should do is find all your parts who are scared of these things. On your own, with your own therapist, and work with them all. These things only get power by scaring us. And when we're not scared of them, they lose all power. And that's one of maybe the most basic truth about all this stuff. And that, there's some sort of wiggles around the edge, but it's fear-based.
Okay, so we're in this last little corner of our talk together. And I'm feeling the pressure to ask you the right questions.
Brilliant question.
Okay, it's sort of two questions in one. I'm getting this thought that maybe it helps you to have some kind of identity of being someone who can do this. Does that kind of help you?
I don't think so much. It's just that I'm not afraid of it anymore. And I have a method that's worked with or a way of working that's worked with a lot of people. I don't really have I don't have this image of myself as this big shot. I think this brings up an important point. I think spiritually, the most poisonous emotion you can have is pride. If I start thinking, oh, I'm this big healer guy, I can come in here and kick butt, and I'm in so much trouble. I am really in trouble. Pride poisons spiritual connection.
I did notice that point. About pride. And I guess it's a spiritual virtue to not be prideful, but yeah, when I think about identity and how it can be really helpful to stand in a position like yours, then I was kind of like, what's going on? But you...
It's more like I don't have anything I need to defend.
Okay.
And if I had an identity, I might have something I needed to defend.
Oh.
One thing I often tell clients that they seem to enjoy, and it really helps the sessions, is I say, I only have one rule. I hate rules, so I only got one. But first, if I say something dumb, please just say, hey, Bob, that was really dumb. And if you want to use 4-letter words with me, that's absolutely fine. Any 4-letter word, it's okay. My one rule is don't say anything because you think you're supposed to. No, make nice. You can cuss me out up and down, but no make nice, okay? And usually at that point, the clients are sort of grinning and they say, okay.
Yes.
And I had one lady who was church-going, older, white-haired, and she said the F word. And she went, oh, I never swear. Some part of her had been waiting, I think, for that invitation.
It is a wonderful invitation, actually. I think we should copy that. all us
Yeah, welcome.
therapists.
Yeah.
Can we take
And
that?
yeah, and when people start saying things because they think they should, or doing what I call make nice, that so gums up the therapy session. There's no, it really slows healing down, way
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah. But it's so entrenched in our culture, I
Yep.
guess. And for me, I don't think I've. I mean, I think it comes up in every therapy session. I mean, when I'm the client, um, I, I think it must come up in every single one, because at some point I'll get, and I don't realize it immediately. Um, but afterwards I'll realize, oh, why did I say yes to that? I actually feel a different way. But in the moment, I kind of just went along with
Yep.
it. So
Yep.
I was making nice, as you say, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
might not realize it.
There's a way I express this. It's a little crude, and you can edit it out of the podcast if you need to. But I also tell people putting whipped cream on a turd does not make a dessert I want to eat.
It and turd means what?
Piece of shit.
Oh, okay, got it.
That's make nice.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so true. Yeah, and I guess it's that enmeshment with a therapist, just the whole moment of someone else asking you to be real, and it's so strange. It's so not in your habitual way of being.
Yeah, it's really hard to be like bluntly honest like that.
Yeah.
I think, we are running out. I think the thing I would like to emphasize is how ignorant I am and how ignorant we are.
Hmm.
Um, I think the most advanced minds on our planet are in preschool or maybe kindergarten for like the super geniuses. But we know almost nothing.
Mm.
You start looking around, with sort of, you open your eyes a little bit, we understand almost nothing. We have no idea what consciousness is. None.
Yeah. Mm.
None in the Western world.
Mm.
We have no way of connecting a piece of meat, our brain, with a subjective experience. Not zero, zero.
Yeah.
So and it's also such a relief. If I know when I'm working with people, hey, none of us here know hardly anything. It's like I don't have to pretend anymore.
No. No. Don't have to
So
pretend. So just the question that was kind of attached to, does it work better having an identity around this, is sort of, what can we do now? Like, you are here, you're doing this in the world, but then after you, as you say, more things are gonna get discovered. What is it that you really want people to have as a starting ground from your work? Do you understand my question?
yeah,
Mm.
I think, and I could be wrong about this one too. I think a really, really important basic understanding from my work is this idea that our minds are porous.
Yeah.
And that goes against everything we've been trained in. Daniel Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiology guy, now there's over 50 books published on that. It's really well established and all that. He said, our language is so bad that we cannot think accurately using our language
Mm.
because we have, when we talk about separate people having, and he says, and he started trying to develop a new language so that we can actually speak accurately.
Mm.
I think it's like that this idea of a citadel mind is deeply, deeply embedded. And just recognizing it intellectually is only like the very first step. So I think this idea of porous mind and living from that, it's the indigenous peoples in North America, they'd always talk about all my relations.
Mm.
And that meant all of nature. It's all about relationship.
Mm.
It's not. And Ian McGilchrist, who I love, he says, and this is sort of gnomic, he says, the relationship is prior to the relata. The relationship comes before the things that are being related. They are actually created in that relationship.
Right.
And actually start thinking that way and experiencing the world this way is a deep, thoroughgoing change. We are a network, an intertwined network of relationships. We're not these billiard balls or citadels bumping into each other.
Mm,
And it's with our language and our culture, it's very, very, very hard to start thinking that way and living that way, you know?
mm, mm. And you're saying it counts for all of us, but
I think so.
you can be more or less porous.
Yeah,
Porous. Mm,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. William James, who was another hero of mine, back in like 1905, said, well, we seem to experience ourselves as islands in a sea, very, very separate. But if you look under the sea, we're all part of the same seafloor. And we can live from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a real short, quick question, and then I have to remember to take a screenshot before you go. But just this is just my mind. I do qigong, and you know about it because you in the book you also mentioned the Tao and Wu Wei, and I think about it because the organs have spirits in Chinese medicine. At least that's what I've studied. I'm no expert at all, but I just study it. So there's that understanding, and sometimes when I do exercises like these strong breathing exercises, I let go of stuff, right? We let go of stuff. And then I've been thinking, can you let go of a burden or an unattached burden? Could you do that? Or is it just not possible to do in a
Yes,
breathing
yes.
exercise?
People do that with physical movement. I've studied dance and expressive arts therapy for 30 years, and I can often dance these things off of me. You know, Peter Nielsen, who's in Denmark. I think you know him.
I know
He's a
him.
yeah, he's a rolfer. He can get these things out with his hands.
Oh, okay.
And even I've seen Dick get them out with his hands because they can jump onto you, you know. They jump onto me sometimes from clients, but because I'm not afraid of them, that's not a big problem. It's just like, oh, it's like if you're out working in the yard, you got mud splashed on you. No big deal. You know, you
Right.
just get it out.
Yeah, it's like a work hazard for you, right? Because it's maybe comes from your clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people doing psychedelics that opens up these boundaries, and they get a lot of people doing psychedelics, especially when they do it in a group environment. They get unattached burdens on them.
That's really cool. So that means we can all to some extent practice it.
Well, it's just these things get on you, you know, whenever your boundary's porous, these things
Hmm.
can get in.
And if you make sure you clear it out, then you are able to do that. Is kind of my
You are,
question.
well, sometimes people need help.
Okay.
Sometimes I get help,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, but you're not stuck with it forever. No.
Right. Right.
It might try and tell you that, try and scare you, but no.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. So I want to take a screenshot. I'm just gonna do that real quick. That's my documentation. And so, do you have anything you want to leave us with, or did we cover everything that it was possible in one? Because I had many, many questions for you, and we kind of settled on just don't ask all of that.
This whole idea of porosity of mind,
Yeah.
there are many, many other metaphors or theoretical frameworks you could use. I mean, we've been talking about unattached burdens, spirit possession. You can also think of this as past life stuff. You can
Okay.
also think of this as legacy burdens, because those are things that come from outside your own personal lifetime experience that have a very, very strong effect on you. So, and I think, you know, like again, we're so ignorant. We're just scratching the surface. There's a lot more to be learned.
I'm thinking about symbolism versus literalism, right? And I also use the soul's evolution when I talk about astrology, knowing absolutely well that I don't know if that is the truth. I do not know, but that is the symbolism that I use for the phenomena that I'm studying.
Yeah,
And so you can take it literal, but you can also not.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think all these theories and stuff are metaphors.
Yeah, okay, you do. Yeah, yeah.
Or we clothe we clothe these phenomena in images and words because that's how we can perceive them better.
That's a good last word, because we can perceive them better. We clothe them in words. Yeah, really good. And yeah, I don't think that you need me selling your books at all, but I just really want to compliment your book again. It's really...
Yeah, by the way, I have another book that should be out in a couple months.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
It's called When You're Going Through Hell, Keep Going.
Oh my God.
And it's a book of quotes.
Again.
Yeah, right. You were saying you like the quotes.
I
Yeah,
do.
Yeah, because I spent 50 years, on this sort of borderline between spirituality and psychotherapy, and collecting quotes on that very thing where spirituality and healing are together. So
Yeah.
that book should be out quite soon.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Robert Falconer, Bob. But so it's called When You're Going to Hell, Keep Going?
When you're going through hell.
Through hell.
Keep going.
That's a great advice, actually, when you're going there.
Yeah.
That is a great advice. Thank you so much.
Hey, you're very welcome. Take care. Great talking with you.